with breaking news. Let's go straight to Lindsay Davis at the ABC News Desk.
Tonight, a verdict in the case of Utah wife and mother Kouri Richins, who published a children's book about grief after the death of her husband and was accused of killing him for money.
We, the jury, unanimously find that the defendant, Kouri Richins, is guilty of aggravated murder.
Richins was found guilty of aggravated murder in the death of her husband, Eric Richins. Prosecutors claim Kouri Richins was $4.5 million in debt and believed that she would inherit his estate. They said that she gave her husband a cocktail laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. Richins waived her right to testify. Her defense team claimed prosecutors did not provide enough evidence to prove their case. The most serious charge, aggravated murder, carries a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. We'll have more on this trial tomorrow on Nightline.
Before we get into this story, and trust me, you are not ready for what you are about to hear, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because the case I am about to walk you through is one of the most calculated, cold-blooded, and deeply disturbing true crime stories of the last decade. A children's book, a dead husband, a Moscow mule, and a woman so composed, so eerily calm, that even the jury who convicted her said they didn't want it to be true. This is the story of Kouri Richins, and it will stay with you, I promise you that. Imagine sitting across from a woman on a morning talk show. She is composed, soft-spoken, even warm. She tells you about the children's book she wrote, a book about grief, about loss, about helping little ones understand why daddy isn't coming home anymore. She says writing it brought her peace. She says it helped her boys. The camera loves her. The audience sympathizes with her. And somewhere out there, Eric Richins' family is watching that interview, knowing something the rest of the world doesn't yet. Because the woman on that screen, the grieving widow, the devoted mother, the published author, had, according to prosecutors, already made herself a Moscow mule, dropped a lethal dose of fentanyl into her husband's drink, watched him go to bed, and waited. This is the story of Kouri Richins. A story about debt hidden behind a perfect life, about a marriage that was quietly rotting from the inside, about a man who, just weeks before he died, texted a friend and said he thought his wife was trying to poison him and nobody listened, and about a woman so calculated, so eerily composed that even the jurors who convicted her said they didn't want it to be true. But the evidence said otherwise. To understand how a woman ends up in a courtroom convicted of poisoning her husband with 5 times a lethal dose of fentanyl, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the night Eric Richins died. Not even to the Moscow mule she made him that evening. You have to go back to who these two people were, and how their lives became so entangled that one of them would decide the only way out was a body bag. Eric Richins was, by every account, the kind of man people just liked. He grew up the oldest of 3 children, raised on a cattle ranch where he spent countless hours hauling hay, feeding animals, and mending fences alongside his father. He was athletic, hardworking, and fiercely devoted to his family. He served a 2-year mission in Mexico City, became fluent in Spanish, earned a degree in international studies from the University of Utah, and then built a successful masonry business from the ground up. He was the kind of man who coached his kids' sports teams, who had the best laugh in the room, who his friends describe as someone who would give you the shirt off his back. People who knew Eric Richins didn't just respect him, they loved him. He was a doting father, a coach, an avid hunter, and an enthusiastic outdoorsman. His friend Linda King, who was there at the very beginning of Eric and Kouri's story, would later say through fought-back tears that what she misses most about Eric is his laugh, that it was the best laugh in town, that when she heard what had happened to him, she felt completely numb. Kouri Darden was a different kind of story altogether. She was born in Oklahoma in 1990 and moved to 17 different states because of her parents' work. Her father went to prison when she was just 6 years old, drunk, and passed out at the wheel. He hit an officer making a traffic stop. After her parents' divorce, she moved to Utah with her mother and brother. By her own account, written in a life story she penned at an Arizona wellness retreat in 2021, her childhood was unstable and itinerant. Her mother was a compulsive gambler. Kouri remembered spending weekends in casino hotel rooms, watching her mother lose money, their house, and their cars. College, she wrote, felt like a fresh start, and that is where she met Eric Richins. She met him in 2009 while working as a cashier at a local Home Depot. By her own admission, she instantly fell for the idea of a marriage with kids and a happy family, a stable family. She got pregnant in her sophomore year. For a woman who had grown up watching everything around her fall apart, Eric Richins represented something she had never really had: safety, stability, the dream of a normal life. On June 15, 2013, Kouri Richins, 23, and Eric Richins, 31, got married in the backyard at their home in Utah. They already had one son. 2 more would follow. On paper, the life they built together looked like everything Kouri had ever wanted. A house in Camas, a quiet mountain town about 40 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. 3 healthy boys. Eric ran a successful masonry business, while Kouri pursued a career in real estate, flipping houses. They were church-going community members. They were, by every outward appearance, a perfectly normal Utah family. But outward appearances, as this story will prove over and over again, can be profoundly, devastatingly deceiving. When the two married, they signed a prenuptial agreement establishing that they would not have rights to each other's property, with one critical exception. If Eric died while the two were lawfully married, his masonry business and estate would transfer to Kouri. That clause, innocuous on a wedding day, would become a cornerstone of a murder prosecution a decade later. For several years, the marriage appeared to function, but underneath the surface, things were beginning to crack. Kouri wrote that her life spiraled after 2018, when she discovered her husband was having what she called an emotional affair. She went to counseling for anxiety and depression. Meanwhile, prosecutors would later argue that Kouri herself was deeply unhappy, not just emotionally, but financially desperate in a way she was hiding from everyone around her. In 2019, Kouri launched Kouri Richins Realty, a house-flipping business focused on buying distressed properties in the Park City area, renovating them, and selling them for profit. On the surface, the business looked like a success, but forensic accountants who later testified at trial revealed it was built on a house of cards. She was borrowing money she couldn't pay back, taking on properties she couldn't afford, and spiraling deeper and deeper into debt while projecting an image of a thriving, successful entrepreneur. And then she did something that would ultimately seal her fate. Prosecutors alleged that in 2019, Kouri began stealing from Eric's accounts. Without his knowledge or permission, she used a fraudulent power of attorney to execute a $250,000 credit deed of trust on the family home, then withdrew the entire amount. Eric's family insists he always knew what was happening with the finances. Prosecutors told a very different story, and in late 2020, they say, Eric found out. In November of 2020, Eric met with an estate planning lawyer named Crystal Bowman Carter. He told her he had 2 primary goals: to protect himself in the short term from the recently discovered financial abuse by his wife, and to protect his 3 young sons in the long term by ensuring that Kouri would never be in a position to manage his property after his death. He created a living trust and named his sister Katie as trustee. He was quietly, methodically, cutting Kouri out, and he did it all without telling her. Kouri would not find out about the trust until after Eric was dead. But here is where this story takes a turn that is hard to fully absorb, even now. Because while Eric was quietly trying to protect himself and his children, Kouri, according to prosecutors, had already started shopping for a way to kill him. In early February 2022, Kouri called her housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, and asked if she could get her some pain pills, claiming they were for an investor she knew. Lauber, who had worked for Kouri for years cleaning her properties, made the purchase, around $600 worth of pills. But that wasn't enough. A few days later, Kouri came back. She needed something stronger. When Lauber texted Kouri to say that the only option was fentanyl pills, Kouri's response was simple and immediate. Okay, go ahead and get them. Lauber picked up $1,000 in cash from a house Kouri owned in Midway, drove to a gas station in Draper, Utah, and exchanged the money for a small clear plastic bag containing approximately 15 to 20 light green pills. She buried them in the outdoor fire pit at the Midway property. Now she had the weapon, and prosecutors believe she used it almost immediately. On Valentine's Day 2022, Kouri allegedly poisoned her husband's sandwich in an attempt to kill him. Eric took one bite and broke out in hives. He couldn't breathe. He grabbed his son's EpiPen, took some Benadryl, and lay down. He survived. And what he did next is one of the most chilling details in this entire case. He called his friend Josh Craze. And according to Josh, Eric was not joking. He was not treating it like an allergic reaction. Josh said Eric was somber and very serious. His business partner Kouri Richins said Eric had fear in his voice.
Do you recall receiving a phone call from Eric Richins at about 2:11 p.m. on Valentine's Day 2022?
I do.
Without saying what Eric said to you, why is it you remember that phone call?
It was notable, I think, for a couple reasons, but the main reason was just well, the topics of the things we talked about, but also the emotion, I guess. It was unlike any other conversation I'd had with Eric. Mostly just kind of his spirits felt almost like somber, and anybody that knows Eric, most of the time you would call and he would already be talking upbeat, and this one was a lot different.
How did he sound to you?
Like I said, somber would be maybe a way to describe it. Very serious. Maybe sincere, which can be is a little like, especially for friends that joke around a lot and kind of rib each other quite a bit, which we did. It was just very outside the norm.
Had you ever heard Eric sound like that before?
No.
Based on what Eric said to you, and without saying anything that Eric said, did you offer Eric any advice?
I don't know that I would say advice other than maybe like questions, like suggestions and questions was my response.
Eric Richins told the people closest to him that he believed his wife had just tried to kill him. He had already told his family that if anything ever happened to him, she was to blame. And yet he stayed. His family later said he stayed because of the boys. Less than 3 weeks after Valentine's Day, Kouri went back to her housekeeper. She needed more pills. A third purchase was made. The fentanyl changed hands again. And on the night of March 3, 2022, Kouri Richins made her husband a Moscow Mule to celebrate a business deal she had just closed. She brought it to their bedroom. He drank it in bed. Kouri Richins called 911 just after 3 a.m. on March 4, 2022, to report that she had found her husband unresponsive. Responders declared him dead at the scene, their home in Commas, Utah. The medical examiner found 5 times the lethal level of fentanyl in Eric's blood and ruled his death an overdose. The drug was illicit, not medical grade, and had been ingested orally. The only people home at the time were Kouri and their 3 young boys. Eric Richins was 39 years old. His boys were 9, 7, and 5. In the immediate aftermath, Kouri told investigators a story about a brain aneurysm. She said her husband had no history of drug use. She cried on camera. She played the grieving widow perfectly. And then, just 3 days after her husband's body was carried out of that bedroom, she texted her housekeeper Carmen Lauber with a question that should send a chill down your spine. Still have your hookup? 3 days. Her husband's body was barely cold, and Kouri Richins was already trying to source more fentanyl. And the day after Eric died, she signed papers to finalize the purchase of a $2 million mansion, a property Eric had reportedly not even wanted to buy. She did not miss a beat. She did not pause. She simply moved forward as if the man she had shared a bed with for 9 years was nothing more than an obstacle that had been removed. But investigators were already paying attention. Eric's family had hired a private investigator. His sisters were asking questions that didn't have comfortable answers. And slowly, the story that Kouri Richins had constructed, the grieving widow, the devoted mother, the woman whose husband had simply died in his sleep, began to unravel. What no one could have predicted, however, was what Kouri would do next. Because rather than lay low, rather than stay quiet and hope the investigation went nowhere, Kouri Richins decided to write a book. A year after Eric's death, she self-published a children's picture book titled Are You With Me? A story centered on ways to help little ones cope with the loss of a loved one. She appeared on local Utah television, warm and composed, and told hosts that she had written the book with her kids to help them navigate their grief. She said it brought her peace. She sat under studio lights, smiled at the camera, and talked about loss. And somewhere across town, detectives were building a murder case against her. There is a particular kind of audacity that investigators find in certain cases, a boldness so breathtaking that it almost works. Almost. Because the same confidence that allows someone to commit a crime, grieve publicly, write a children's book, and smile on television is often the very same confidence that makes them careless. And Kouri Richins, it turns out, had been careless in ways that were quietly, methodically, being cataloged by people who were very good at their jobs. Eric's family had never believed the brain aneurysm story, not for a single day. His sister Amy later recalled that Eric had previously believed Kouri tried to kill him during a trip to Greece several years prior, that after his wife gave him a drink, he became violently ill and called his sister saying he believed she had tried to kill him. Then came Valentine's Day. Then came the Moscow Mule. For Eric's family, the pattern was impossible to ignore. They hired a private investigator. They pushed law enforcement to look harder. They refused to let it go. And so investigators looked harder. What they found, piece by piece, was a financial portrait of a woman who had been drowning for years, and who had decided that the only life preserver within reach had Eric Richins' name on it. A forensic accountant testified for a full day about Kouri's struggling real estate business and perpetual debt cycle. As of the date Eric died, her financial enterprise was collapsing, and without a massive infusion of cash, it would have continued to collapse. The numbers were staggering. Prosecutors demonstrated that she was $4.5 million in debt and had taken out nearly $2 million in life insurance policies on Eric without his knowledge. Not one policy, not two. She had allegedly bought 4 separate life insurance policies on her husband between 2015 and 2017, and Eric had tried to remove her from his policies, and his will not long before he died. Think about that timeline for a moment. Eric had quietly gone to a lawyer, created a trust designed to protect his assets and his sons from his own wife, and had begun the process of cutting her out financially. He was laying the groundwork to leave. Their prenuptial agreement meant that if she left him, she would leave most of his money. Divorce would leave her with nothing. But death, his death, was a different story entirely, and Kouri knew it. Prosecutors alleged that Kouri had siphoned $250,000 from Eric's accounts to fund her own failed business ventures, hoping to earn enough money to leave him. But she could not earn enough. And all the while, she was spending time with another man, a man named Robert Josh Grossman, with whom she was having an affair, and with whom she dreamed of building an entirely different life. Grossman was called to the stand during the trial, and what he described was not some grand, passionate love story. The jury saw dozens of affectionate text messages between Richins and Grossman, including some where she said she dreamed of their future together, though Grossman testified the prospect was more fantasy than reality on his end. He appeared to cry on the stand. He said he felt guilt. He said he felt sorrow. He had no idea, he implied, just how far Kouri had been willing to go to make those dreams real. Because while she was sending him messages about their future together, she was allegedly out purchasing fentanyl through her housekeeper and slipping it into her husband's food. Prosecutors revealed that Kouri had already booked a future vacation with Grossman for a date she knew Eric would not live to see. She had already planned the after. Before he was even dead, she had planned the after. Now the most important witness in this entire case, the person whose testimony sat at the center of the prosecution's argument, was Carmen Lauber. Carmen was Kouri's housekeeper. She had cleaned the Richins' home for years. She had met both Eric and Kouri. She knew the family. And in early 2022, she became, according to prosecutors, the bridge between Kouri Richins and the drug that killed her husband. Lauber testified about purchasing illicit pills for Kouri 4 separate times. The first time, Kouri said the pills were for an investor she knew. The second time, she asked for something stronger. When Lauber said the only option was fentanyl, Kouri said, "Okay, go ahead and get them." The exchange happened at a gas station in Draper, Utah. Approximately 15 to 20 light green pills changed hands. The money Lauber was paid for one of the exchanges, a $1,300 check, was made out for Construction Clean Midway. She told the jury bluntly, "I never cleaned a house ever in my life for $1,300. When Eric died, Lauber called Kouri. She needed to know. She asked her directly, "Please tell me those pills were not for him." Kouri Richins told her, "No, they were not. Eric passed away from a brain aneurysm." And yet 3 days after Eric's death, Richins texted Lauber asking if she still had her drug hookup. 3 days after burying her husband, still sourcing fentanyl, the housekeeper made a 4th purchase, and when she later learned that Eric had actually died of a fentanyl overdose, she said it hit her like a freight train. She wiped her eyes on the stand and said she needed to take accountability for her part in what happened. The defense hammered Carmen Lauber hard. They pointed out her criminal history, her drug use throughout February and March of 2022, the inconsistencies in her story across multiple interviews, and the deal she had reached with prosecutors to avoid her own lengthy prison sentence. Defense attorneys even played a video in court where an investigator told Lauber his goal was to get the details that would ensure Kouri got convicted of murder. It was a legitimate and powerful challenge. And for a moment in that courtroom, you could feel the jury weighing it. But then came the rest of the evidence. And the rest of the evidence was where the defense ran out of road. Kouri's digital footprint told a damning story all by itself. Her search history included queries about lethal doses of fentanyl and luxury prisons. She had looked up what it felt like to die from an opioid overdose. She had researched what prison life was like, as if, somewhere in the back of her mind, she was already accounting for the possibility of getting caught. Her phone records revealed something else. Though she told police she was asleep during the hours of Eric's death, investigators discovered that several messages had been sent and received on her phone during that exact window. All of them had been deleted. She said she was asleep. Her phone said otherwise, and she had erased the evidence. Then there was the prenuptial agreement, that document signed on their wedding day that haunted every corner of this case. If Kouri left Eric, she left his money. But the prenup had one exception. If he died while they were lawfully married, his business and estate would transfer to her. She could not afford to divorce him. She could not afford to let him divorce her, but she stood to inherit everything if he died. And she had quietly taken out millions in life insurance on a man whose own estate planning lawyer said he had come to see her specifically to protect himself from his wife. The insurance fraud charges were almost as stunning as the murder charge itself. Prosecutors said Kouri had opened nearly $2 million in life insurance policies on Eric without his knowledge. And then, the day after he died, She allegedly signed papers to close on the $2 million mansion he had never wanted to buy. The body was not yet cold. The paperwork was already moving. And then there was the letter. While Kouri was sitting in the Summit County Jail awaiting trial, investigators found a 6-page handwritten letter in her cell. It was addressed to her family, and it was, prosecutors argued, an attempt to manufacture a false defense from behind bars. In the letter, Richins instructed her brother to tell her former attorney that Eric had confided in him about getting fentanyl from Mexico and getting high every night. She was trying to plant the idea that Eric was a secret drug addict who had overdosed on his own supply. The defense said the letter was a fictional story she was working on. Prosecutors called it witness tampering. But perhaps the most haunting element of the entire case, the detail that lodged itself in the public's imagination and refused to let go, was the book. A year after Eric's death, Kouri Richins self-published a children's picture book called Are You With Me? She appeared on local television, warm and articulate, and said she had written it with her kids to help them understand what happened to their father. The book featured a child looking for his deceased father in everyday moments. It portrayed the father as a gentle presence watching over his family from above. She sat under studio lights and talked about healing. She talked about love. She talked about grief. She wrote a grief book for the children whose father she allegedly poisoned, and she promoted it on television, and she smiled. Prosecutors did not let the jury forget that. They argued the book was not an act of love or healing. It was a calculated performance, an attempt to cement her image as a devoted, heartbroken widow, and to stay one step ahead of an investigation that was closing in faster than she realized. She was arrested on May 8, 2023, and had been held in the Summit County Jail ever since, maintaining her innocence. Her legal team went on the offensive immediately. They called the investigation sloppy and biased. They said Eric had health issues, used marijuana gummies for pain, and that the truth was far more complicated than prosecutors wanted the jury to believe. They argued that the housekeeper was unreliable, that the drug dealer who allegedly supplied the fentanyl had recanted key parts of his account, and that not a single witness could testify to having seen Kouri put anything into Eric's drink. That last point was the crux of the defense's argument. Attorney Wendy Lewis hammered it in her closing. They cannot tell you how Eric ingested that fentanyl. They haven't done their job, and now they want you to make inferences based on paper-thin evidence. It was a compelling argument, and in a different case, with a different set of facts, it might have worked. But the prosecution had spent 3 weeks and called more than 40 witnesses, building a web so dense, so layered, so interconnected that the jury could not find a thread loose enough to pull. The financial motive, the insurance policies, the affair, the secret trust Eric created to protect himself from his own wife, the housekeeper, the drug purchases, the Valentine's Day attempt, the deleted text messages, the phone activity during the hours she claimed to be asleep, the search history, the letter written from jail, the book. The defense rested without calling a single witness. Kouri Richins chose not to testify in her own defense. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. At 6:35 p.m. on March 16, 2026, the verdict was read: guilty on every single count: aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, 2 counts of insurance fraud, forgery. Kouri Richins bowed her head when the verdict was read aloud in court. After 3 weeks of sitting at that defense table like a statue, composed, unreadable, giving nothing away, she finally looked down. One of the jurors, who later spoke to Good Morning America, said the deliberation room was deeply emotional. The jurors went around the table and let it out, not just about the evidence, but about what it felt like to sit with all of it, to hold the weight of what had happened to Eric Richins, to think about those 3 boys. People were really sad, the juror said. They did not want to find her guilty. They were really hoping she would be innocent. But they couldn't come to that conclusion, and it was heartbreaking. Outside the courthouse, Eric's sister Amy stood in the cold Utah air and spoke. Honestly, I feel like we're all in shock. It's been a long time coming, so just very happy that we got justice for my brother. Kouri Richins is scheduled to be sentenced on May 13, 2026, which would have been Eric's 44th birthday. She faces a minimum of 25 years in prison, with the possibility of life without parole. She still faces a separate case involving 26 additional financial felony charges. The legal battle, her attorneys have signaled, is far from over. But for the family of Eric Richins, for his sisters, his father, his friends, and most of all for 3 boys who lost their dad on a quiet night in March 2022, the verdict was the only thing that had ever mattered. Not the book, not the television appearances, not the performance of grief that had fooled so many people for so long. Just the truth. Here is the truth that a jury unanimously agreed on after less than 3 hours. Eric Richins did not die by accident. He did not overdose. He was not a secret drug addict who got hold of something too strong. He was a father who coached his kids' sports teams, who had the best laugh in the room, who had quietly gone to a lawyer to try to protect his children, who had called his friends with fear in his voice and told them what he suspected. He was a man who knew, and he stayed anyway, for the boys. And on a night when he thought he was celebrating a small business win with his wife, drinking a Moscow Mule in his own bedroom in his own home, a man who had done nothing more threatening than try to protect his children and his assets, he was killed by the person who was supposed to love him most. Kouri Richins wrote a book about grief, about how to help children understand why someone they love is gone, about finding comfort in the idea that the people we lose are still watching over us. Eric Richins' boys will grow up without their father because of their mother. There is no children's book in the world that covers that. If this story hit you the way it hit me, if you found yourself sitting here just absolutely stunned by the layers of this case, then you already know why true crime matters. It is not about being entertained by darkness. It is about making sure people like Eric Richins are not forgotten, that their story gets told, that the truth comes out. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button because we do this every single week. We go deep. We go full documentary. We do not skim the surface. And if you have been here for a while, thank you. Genuinely. The comments, the shares, the watch time, it all helps this channel reach more people and keep these stories alive. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this case that hit you the hardest? For me, it was Eric telling his friends on Valentine's Day with fear in his voice, and staying anyway. Rest easy, Eric. Your boys know the truth now.